And apologies in advance. My landscapers always decide to come right around this time.
I feel your pain, Callie. They
know.
always come when I'm teaching a pragmatic class. They
Yeah,
always show up and they're right outside my window with their, machines and going back and forth. And I'm always like, oh.
I know, right? They make everything so beautiful, but they certainly distract me. So I might put myself on mute depending upon how much closer they get. But great. Well, welcome everyone. We're a couple minutes past, so certainly want to get started. Happy to have you. Welcome back. This is our Pragmatic Institute AMAs. These are our office hours that we have weekly. They take place every Friday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern with a different Pragmatic Institute instructor. So today we have Mr. Paul Young. Hey, Paul.
Hey.
Thanks for joining us. Are you freezing out there in Austin or?
Yes, I am officially a popsicle here in Austin. If you've been following the news, then we've had lots of challenges over the last week when it got down to 3 degrees at my house. And that's not supposed to happen in Texas. There's a reason I live in Texas, and it's not because I like being cold, quite the opposite. So this has been a big problem, and my pipes broke and there was water everywhere, and it's just been a disaster. But it's all done now. Hopefully, knock on wood, temperatures are above freezing and hopefully they'll stay there. And I think we're getting on the way back to normal.
Yeah, well, there we go. We appreciate you, taking the time to lend us your expertise today. So, before we get started, just want to give that shout out to the Pragmatic alumni community, a community we're so proud of. It's growing leaps and bounds by the day. One of the things now that we're offering is that no matter how you train with us, you get a lifetime access into the pack, which is fantastic. I mean, so many robust programs, peer-to-peer engagements. We also have sort of that pressure-free environment that we want to offer those opportunities to sort of, even if you're looking to refine your presentation, your communication skills, those public speaking, we're certainly there for you. Become a mentor, search for a mentor. We certainly have it all. So you can definitely check that out at pragmaticinstitute.com/community. And for everyone who's on the call today, wanted to remind you that we are doing that new campaign where anybody who asks the best live question of the discussion will get lunch on us. So, a Grubhub gift certificate to your very favorite place to make sure that, we're still all staying connected and we can still grab that favorite dish while we're in quarantine. And so, Paul, that will be your decision at the end of the discussion. Anything that you felt was most thought-provoking that you liked to answer most, and we'll kind of go from there. So again, those folks can submit them to me. You can submit them in the chat, however you'd like to go about it. But, Paul, we certainly do have some questions submitted prior to. So I will get to it with this first one from Richard. Richard asks, I'm trying to get my team to use sprints, but this is a fairly new thing for us as we've begun putting Agile into place. How can I most effectively make the transition without losing the momentum from approaches we have used in the past?
Okay, that's a good question. So let's talk about Agile and sprints. So pretty much I've worked with probably in the last 10 years, somewhere between 300 to 400 companies that are in the software space, or at least they have a software element to what they do or services. And they're pretty much all would say, maybe 90% of them would say that they're doing Agile. But I would actually say that most of them are wrong about that because what they're actually doing is something that I would call hybrid. They're doing a hybrid of Agile and something else, typically waterfall. Although nowadays we're mixing and matching all sorts of development methodologies like SAFe and Kanban, or we have lean in more manufacturing environments and so on. There's all sorts of different methodologies that we mix, and so I think the Agile, training people and the people who are what I call Agilistas, the one who are really like into Agile and they really are into the ceremonies and the rituals and everything that goes into it, would say that the point of Agile is not perfection and throwing away everything that was good or working about what we had before. It's about continuously moving towards a destination that is a better spot. And so I think that there are things that you can do in the short term to increase the viability of an agile approach, sprints being one of them, that will make this better for the long term. And so one thing you might try, for example, is instead of trying to scale agile to the entire organization in the beginning, start small. Start with one team, start with one project, and get it working with a small group, just so you can start to iron out some of the issues, because you're going to have issues. It always happens. And then once you nail it, then you can scale it across the rest of the organization. Another thing that I've seen be really helpful is to separate the build sprint from the design sprint. And so this whole concept of design is something that we're really covering now in Pragmatic. We're introducing a new class called design here in this next month that we're really excited about. But the thing about design is that it has its own space, it has its own time frame, and sometimes that doesn't match up correctly with what engineering is trying to do in a 2-week sprint, for example. And so I see a lot of teams separating the design process from the build process. So we have a separate set of design sprints that are up front, and then we have build sprints. And it's almost like you're designing for what you're going to build in the next sprint beforehand, to give you a little bit of breathing room to take some of the pressure off of that. So I like to do that. And then one final thought to make your agile process work better: product manager, product owner, two different sets of responsibilities, right? Sometimes we mash them all together into one person, and the organization says, well, we want to have a product owner, and I don't want to hire somebody new. And product owner and product manager, they both have product in the title, so let's make that one person. But the issue with that is that the product owner role is, by definition, really tactical. It's really firefighting. It's all day with engineering. It's just very inside the building focused. By design, that's what we want. We want to help them arm the R&D team to move faster. But what that doesn't respect is that the product management side of the role is outward facing. And if you put them together into one person, all of the outward facing work, in my experience, the product manager stuff, the strategic stuff, it gets pushed out and pushed out and pushed out to the future until it just never happens, because we're so busy firefighting. So if you're trying to scale agile and make it really work, I think it's pretty important to carve out the time, the resourcing, and the energy for the outward facing work of listening to the market. Maybe that means separating product manager, product owner into 2 separate people, or at a minimum, carving off the time so that the strategic outward facing work gets done. So that's a couple of different ideas.
And I love that once you nail it, then you can scale it. Is that yours? Or I'm like, because I'm going to use that.
I can't take credit for that. Somebody else came up with that term. I just adopted it.
It's a good one. Well, here's one. While we're on the subject of agile, Paul, I wanted to ask you, this one comes from Cheryl, which I think kind of has some similar ties. She says, do you have any advice in writing specs for backend features? And should I be writing user stories for these features as well?
Okay, really good question. All right, so first of all, let's separate the conversation specification or spec versus requirement or user story. 2 separate things. Right? Requirement or user story, which is what we teach in our class called Build and also Design. These are really more about the user and the user's problem and being able to articulate the problem that we're trying to solve. The spec is more of how are we going to do it? And a spec might include things like, mock-ups, wireframes, gray screens, use cases, all sorts of getting into the nitty-gritty of how we're going to technically construct that feature or that API in the case of a platform or backend type thing. Sometimes the product manager is asked to write both the requirement or user story and the specification. But recognize that when you go from user story requirement, where you're focusing on the what and the who, and you jump over to the spec, you're getting into the how. And so at this point, you're taking off your product management hat and you're now putting on the hat of architect or designer, because now you're participating in the design of the solution. Which may be fine, and maybe that's what your business wants, but you have to consciously realize that we're now getting into the how. And this is where we would want to engage resources that are really good at that. So I think of designers, front-end designers, especially, and design researchers. I think about architects, especially for a platforming type product. People who are really in the guts of the technology and know how the pieces fit together and so on. That's the right person to engage in the specification level discussion. And the last thought I'll leave you with here is that should you be writing a user story or a requirement that focuses on the who and the what for a platform or a back-end feature? The answer is absolutely yes. And the reason I say this is that every single feature that we add to the product, whether it's in the back end or something that's user facing, the only reason that we should add a feature to the product is in service of solving a user's problem. And if we can't articulate what problem we're solving for a user, why are we adding that feature to the product to begin with? And so should you be able to articulate and write that user story or requirement for every feature, even on a backend? Yeah, because why are you adding it if not to solve somebody's problem? So that's how I think about it.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I love that, you know, the how and the why, right? They're very different. They're very different hats. So no, that's great. You know, and actually it kind of leads me to this next question. Here's another question about features, but this one is, it's a little detailed. So hang with me here, Paul, but it says, this is from Charlie. Charlie says, I'm being tasked with prioritizing features by cost of delay and need to estimate revenue per feature. How should I go about this? And is there anyone else I should be discussing with besides our engineers?
Okay, Charlie. All right, so we need to talk. So first of all, I get that the business sometimes asks you to associate revenue to individual features, but here's the problem. There's only one good way that I know of to do that. So if you're ever asked to tie revenue to an individual feature, like if an executive comes to you and says, you know, Lanka, how much revenue would we lose if we cut this one feature? Or how much are we going to gain if we add this one feature? There's only one research technique that I'm aware of that can quantify that down at a feature level. That research technique is referred to as conjoint analysis. So if you're ever asked to tie revenue to a feature, conjoint is what you need to do. Now here, so to answer the question that Charlie was asking, should I be talking to other people other than my engineers? Yeah, because conjoint analysis is out in the market talking to your buyers to understand how much they value those individual features. Your engineers have no idea how much your market values an individual feature. They're not talking to the market, they're building the product, they're internally facing. And so should you talk to people? Yeah, you should talk to buyers if you're trying to quantify revenue to a feature. Now here's the catch. Doing conjoint analysis is not cheap. It's actually kind of expensive because to do it well requires somebody who knows how to do a conjoint study. And that costs money. Oftentimes what you will find is that it costs more to do the conjoint study than just to build the feature to start with. And so this is a sort of cost benefit analysis that you're going to have to run really quick to say, does it make more sense to do the conjoint study or does it make more sense to just build the feature? Sometimes it makes more sense just to build it because the conjoint study is too expensive. So you got to do that trade-off. You know your situation better than I do. But that's what I would think of when you're asking that question. Should you talk to other people? Yes. Should you actually do the conjoint study? Probably not. But maybe you need to talk to your executive team and have them think about what are they really asking for here? Are we trying to tie revenue to individual features? I find that the necessity for that is usually pretty rare. Like, why would you need to do that? What problem are we trying to solve? I would take it back to that.
Oh, okay. Clarifying question. This is Alika. So we, for 2021, all the product lines are actually now being held accountable to get CapEx dollars. They actually have to show line of sight for revenue, not at the feature level. But to me, I think that's a fair request, right? That, hey, you shouldn't be spending IT dollars if you don't have line of sight to revenue.
Yep.
But I guess what you're saying is, well, I guess when I hear you saying, I feel like there's something in between, which is at least go validate value with your clients. Yes. Or evaluators. I mean, so I think it's sometimes hard to express those in actual dollars, but you know, a lot of this is art. It's not a science.
There's no perfect answer. Any estimate we give is just that, it's an estimate, right? So, I mean, it's not like it's going to be carved into marble. But yeah, you're right. So we've been just talking about like the feature level, like down here. How do you tie revenue to a feature? In my experience, that's too low of a level. So it's a lot easier, I think, to test revenue potential a little higher level. And up here is what I would call the market problem or business plan level, business planning, I should say. And so if I bundle together a bunch of features that are all in service of solving somebody's problem in the market, there's a bunch of research that I can do in the market to find out how much somebody would value having their problem solved.
Sure.
And it's a lot easier to do that than to test individual features.
Yeah, I agree. It's really bundling features or themes or whatever of problems you're solving for them. Okay.
Yeah. Totally agree.
And Paul, I just want to back up a little bit because Lanka had a good follow-up question, and this kind of ties back to Cheryl's question, right? Which was, do you have any advice in writing specs for backend features, and should I be writing user stories for these features as well? You gave some good insight there, but Lanka wanted to follow up, and she said, so you should also differentiate between user stories versus market requirements. And then and then just one more follow-up, and she said that she thought that product and market recs come from the same product manager. Is she wrong? Just some clarification on that.
Yeah. All right. So different companies refer to these things by different ways. And so I'm just going to talk about the pragmatic way and the language that we use when teaching this idea. Some companies have this idea of like MRD, PRD, spec document. So there's all these different levels. We basically break it into the requirement, what we call the requirement, which is it contains 4 key elements, which is the what problem are we solving, the what, the who, for whom, that's your persona, the when, and the why. So like those things need to be represented. Now, could those be represented in a user story? Sure. If you wrote your user story in a way that would contain those elements. Most user stories, if you follow like the Michael Cohn style of writing user stories, will contain at least a couple of those elements. But what we teach in our classes, specifically our build class, when we get into requirements creation, really zeroes in on those 4 things: the who, the what, the why, and the when, so that we can give better context to our teams so they know what problem we're trying to solve and for whom. Now, we call that an RTW style requirement, requirements that work. That's just our method. It looks very similar to a user story. So maybe another way to think about it is like a user story plus, plus some additional things that give it better context. But yeah, I think those words are fairly interchangeable for most organizations, at least the way that we think about it. So hopefully, Blanca, that answers your question.
Yeah, Lanka, is that helpful? I mean, feel free to pop off of mute if you want any more clarification. We get to pick Paul's brain for another half hour, so plenty of time.
I don't know if my brain can fill up another half an hour. We'll see. We'll see.
All right, Paul, I got the next one for you here. So this one comes from Sophia, who says, what kind of questions do you recommend asking in a survey for a hardware company that will give you the most bang for your buck? We're considering going with a survey company, but with most having a cap of 10 questions per survey, I want to make sure we're asking multi-layered questions that will give us the most value to work off of.
Okay, Sophia, we got to talk. We got some issues here that we need to address. So all right, first of all, what type of questions do you recommend asking in a survey as a hardware company? Time out. I'm going to take you back to a saying that we develop and teach in many of our classes at Pragmatic, which is that your business is not hardware or software or services. Your business is solving problems for your market. It just so happens that today you happen to solve their problems in the form of hardware. But I don't want to lock us into being a hardware company, because then that dictates that all future solutions will be derived in hardware. But what if we could solve their problem with a combination of service and SaaS, or hardware and accompanying software that's in the cloud, right? We want to make sure that we always have a problem-solving mindset rather than a hardware, software, or service mindset, because it locks in our thinking too much. Okay. So with that said, what questions should you ask in a survey? And the answer I would give to that is, I have no idea. Because if you remember from our what we teach in terms of market research, there are 2 phases to market research. I call them phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 is what we call discovery style research. Discovery research is qualitative research, meaning that it's like an interview or an observation, or if you're a designer, you might call it ethnographic research. But the basic idea is, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to observe someone, preferably in what I refer to as their native habitat, wherever they live or work. and I'm going to try to find out what problems they have, and so on. And I'm going to do that, I don't know, maybe a half a dozen or 10 times with different people until I start seeing what I think are some trends in terms of problems that they have. Only once I've gone through the qualitative research am I informed enough to figure out what questions I need to ask in my survey. The survey is phase 2. That's called validation. And the whole point of validation is not to discover new things. That's what your discovery is for. Because if you try to ask open-ended, multi-layered questions in your survey, what do you think you're going to get? You're going to get a bunch of long textual responses that you can't data mine because it's just unstructured textual data that are open to interpretation and that you can't follow up on. And so if I'm sitting down with Callie doing what we call a Nihito visit, which is a field-based research, if she says something really interesting to me during the course of that field visit, there's a light bulb that pops up over my head, and I say, aha, that's a really interesting thing. I've got 5 follow-up questions for you. Boom, 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 and I get a chance to follow up right there. But if you ask that same question in a survey and somebody types in something that's really interesting, by the time you get back to them 6 weeks later to ask your follow-up question, they don't even remember doing it. Right? And so for that reason, I like to keep discovery and validation separate in their respective tools, and you get better results out of both. And so my suggestion would be, before you jump to the survey and risk asking the wrong questions, start first with your discovery and form some hypotheses that you then want to test. Think of it as a cycle, discovery and validation, that goes on forever. Once you get your discovery done, now you're ready for your survey. Once you get to that point, rather than going with a survey company who limits you to 10 questions, there's a lot of survey tools, SurveyMonkey, there's a gazillion of them, and they're relatively low cost. For you to do these things yourself is not that hard. But here's an even better idea. Buy the tool, spend $25 a month to get access to the tool, like SurveyMonkey or one of those tools, Qualtrics, and then hire a consultant who is experienced in data science and formulating good survey questions. Because formulating a good survey question that's free of bias and gets to the right information is a little bit of art and science. And that's where I would put your funding, rather than engaging with a company to run the survey for you. Get somebody to help you form the question. And if you do it in that cycle, discovery, validation, and then get some help on the back end, I think you'll get better results.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I don't think a lot of people think that, right? Because oftentimes they're doing it in-house, and we know, our persona is better than anybody else. But to your point, somebody who's seasoned in it, that's certainly where you should be spending your bucks if you're going to do it. So, we've had already great live questions by Lanka and Alika. Thank you guys so much for submitting. Feel free, we still have time if there's any other ones. Don't be shy. Anybody on YouTube Live, come pop in. We always say, come late, leave early. These sessions are for you. So anytime you can make it, we certainly love to have you. Paul, I got another one for you here in the meantime. This one comes from Seth. How should we treat a key addition or enhancement to a product that already exists? He lends an example. A search feature exists, but you want to validate AI onto the search feature. And then how would you do that as opposed to other features that you develop?
Okay, good question. I'm going to try not to sound too much like a broken record here, but it's very similar to one of the questions that was asked earlier. And so for any feature that you're adding to an existing product, my question is always why. Why are we adding that feature, and what problem are we trying to solve? If we're adding AI to our search, well, why? What problem does AI in search solve that we can't solve without it? Maybe the problem is it makes our search faster or more complete, or it helps me find information that I couldn't find on my own or wouldn't know where to look, or whatever. I don't care what problem it solves, but if you can't articulate the problem about why you're doing something for your users, then your marketing won't be clear. Your development team won't be clear about why they're doing it, so they're probably going to build the wrong thing. Your executive and sales team are not going to be clear when they talk about it externally and try to sell people on it. And you're going to end up with customers who buy something that doesn't meet their expectations because we weren't singing off the same page. And so if you came to our foundations class, you heard us talk about this concept of positioning and getting everyone, I call it singing off the same song sheet, just like a hymnal, right? When you hear a choir sing, they're all singing off the same page. Same idea. For any feature, whether it's new product, existing products, something you're dreaming up in the shower, Why? What problem are you trying to solve? Start there, and then that will guide you to the right answer.
Great. We just had Eric join. Hey, Eric. Happy Friday. Good to see you again. Eric actually won our question of the week a couple of weeks back. So we'll see if he's a contender yet again. Yeah. Eric, feel free to toss him in the chat if you got him.
I want to hear what you got on
Grubhub. In the meantime, Paul, I got one from Candace here. And I'm actually really interested about this question. So I'm interested to hear your take. Candace says, do you have any recommendations for how to best use common language while also differentiating? We find that most vendors in our space all speak the same lingo and use most of the same messaging points. How can she set herself apart?
Yeah, that can be a little tricky because what we don't want to do is resort to jargon and buzzwords because those are what we call bankrupt, those words. You know, when I think about words like scalable, cloud, next generation, AI, ML, you know, things like that, those words are so overused because everyone talks about their scalable, next generation, cloud, AI, ML solution. And so when everyone uses those words, it's almost like they don't mean anything and they cause your buyer's eyes to glaze over and their ears to turn off. And so what we teach is that in order to forget about differentiation for a second, right? Differentiation doesn't matter yet. What matters before differentiation matters is, can you clearly speak to your buyer about the problem you're solving in a way that they understand it? And so what we recommend when you talk about your product, again, we're going to set differentiation aside for a moment. Can you clearly articulate to your buyer what problem you're solving for them and why they should care about that problem? That should be easy if you did your market research in the beginning and you found their problem and then you solved their problem and now you're telling them that you solved their problem. That should be pretty easy because like you followed this problem thread all the way through from inception all the way now through to go to market. If you haven't done your upstream market research and now you're being tasked with bringing something to market and you don't know what problem you solve, it's a little bit trickier because now you got to backtrack and figure out, did we actually build something the market cares about? I'm going to assume that you did. Only once you get to being able to talk to the problem you solve for your buyer or user and why they care, and you can clearly articulate that in a way that they understand, do you then start to care about differentiation. Because differentiation points, sometimes you solve different problems than your competitor solves, right? Sometimes you solve the same problems, okay? But differentiation will typically come in not in terms of solving different problems, but in how you're solving the problem. And buyers don't care how you solve their problem until they care that you're actually solving a problem that they have. And so the issue that I see with most organizations, especially in tech, is that they jump over the conversation of what problem they're having and they get immediately into how they're doing it. And so they'll blast you with a list of like 87 different technologies and features, and they'll say, you know, buy our solution because we have this, you know, AES 256-bit encryption and we have our SOAP API via blah, blah, blah. And I don't care about any of that unless I care that your product actually solves my problem. Now, once I understand that you solve a problem that I care about, then I might start to dig into how you do it and how you're different and better than the competition and so on and so on. But if we shortcut the problem discussion and jumped to the technology part too quickly, then it turns people off because now they're trying to absorb all these features without the context of why they should understand and care about them. So don't shortcut that. Even if you're talking about the same problems, that's okay. Because once you get to the how conversation, it will become more clear to the buyer. And that's where you might set yourself apart. But don't shortcut the problem discussion first.
Yeah. You know, that's actually, I feel like we're having a really good conversation here. So I kind of want to bump a couple questions ahead because I feel like this kind of ties in. This comes from Cassandra. Is there a leading practice when doing competitor analysis, right? Obviously, when we're looking at differentiation, et cetera, we dip our toe in that. So she says, you know, is there a leading practice for that? You know, and how deep should she really dive, like when she's doing the competitive analysis? What are your thoughts?
So, I mean, I hate answering a question with a question, but this is one where I kind of would, if Cassandra were here, and I would also invite her to come back, you know, on a future AMA and maybe provide a little bit more depth and detail to this question, because like so much of what product teams do, the answer here is that it depends. What's the right level of depth in competitive analysis? Is there a best practice? Well, sure. You can make a competitive analysis as deep as you want it to be. I've seen organizations that have entire teams, and that's all they do is sit around all day and research the competition. I've seen teams that have budgets, in the millions of dollars that they spend on hiring secret shoppers to go out and shop the competition's solution and, see and like do competitive teardowns. Like if you work for an automotive company, you think Ford doesn't buy GM's and Chrysler's products and like actually tear them apart? They do. They spend lots and lots and lots of money on that. Most organizations don't have the ability to do that. And so what I want you to picture is the old time scale that had the two sides that would go up and down like this. So what you got to think about for what's the right level of competitive depth for you and for your organization is the two sides of the scale. On one side is your competitive analysis and how much you want to spend in terms of time and energy and money. And on the other side is risk. How much risk are you willing to take on? Now, if you are not willing to take on much risk, you're going to have to spend more money on the other side and time and energy on your competitive analysis. On the other hand, if you're a startup, then yeah, I care about the competition, but before I care about the competition, I might care first about like, am I building the right thing to begin with? Right. And so it's the question I would put back to her in this case is, where are you on that risk scale and how much should you invest based on that?
Yeah. And then just to kind of follow up with that, like, what do you think, Paul, is the most important things to pay attention to, right? Because obviously we're uncovering a lot when we buy their products and we look into their messaging and their personas and how they're coming across. I mean, what do you kind of say, hey, these are the key points that I'm taking into account when I'm looking at it?
So that's a good question. So the answer to that is, it doesn't matter what I think as a product manager of the competition. What matters is, what do the buyers in our market think about the competition versus my product? That's what matters. And so there's a really great tool that we actually teach in our classes, Foundations and Focus, called win-loss analysis. And win-loss analysis seeks to really answer this question. Why are we winning and why are we losing? What does the competition, what does the buyer think of the competition? What do they think about us? Why they choose one over the other? You may find that the things you think are really important don't matter to the buyer, or that they really care about things that you didn't think they cared about at all. But that's something that we have to find out from the outside in. I see a lot of engineering driven organizations. They get so enamored with their technology and they get so wrapped up in like, oh, look at this cool thing we built. It's this shiny object. Nobody cares. They go out and talk to buyers and the buyer's like, yeah, I don't care about that. Well, then why did we spend all this time talking about it internally, making presentations and giving to sales to talk about this, having our sales team go out and demo things that nobody cares about, right? Win-loss analysis will help us map out that buyer's journey so that we can understand what matters to the buyer, because that will inform what you should care about with regard to competitive analysis.
Great. I'm going to keep it going here. And then, just so everyone knows, we have about 10 minutes left. Feel free to pop those questions in the chat. You can send them to me personally if you prefer. In the meantime, Paul, I got another one for you here. This one comes from Michael, and he says, I have an MBA in engineering, and I developed a software product. So I understand the idea of taking a product from inception to launch. However, he's finding it hard to break into that PM role as they tend to require some previous background. Any ideas or tips for him to kind of navigate this?
That's a tough one. So here's what I would suggest to Michael if he were here. This is a journey that I took. If you go all the way back in time, my undergraduate degree is in film, right? But I decided when I graduated University of Texas with a degree in film that I didn't want to move to New York or LA. And so I taught myself how to program, and I caught on with some, companies here in Austin as a contract software developer, and eventually as a full-time software developer for a few years. Until one day my CTO came to me and said, hey, Paul, about your software development skill set, it's not that good. But I was like, he said, but I've noticed that you're really good at talking to our customers and figuring out what they want. So I'd like to make you our product manager. And so at that point I said, great. That sounds good. What's a product manager? And he said, I have no idea. Why don't you go to this pragmatic training and find out? And that's how I found myself going through this whole thing. But things have changed since then, because when product management was this new thing that nobody had ever heard of, then we would just plug people in and kind of hope for the best. Nowadays, hiring managers and executives look for, what I would call the unicorn product manager. I want somebody with 15 years experience in product management in my industry, who also has technical chops, who also, has been an executive, who also blah, blah, the list goes on and on. And I always tell hiring managers, like, that person doesn't exist. And if they do exist, they already are gainfully employed somewhere. And so you're going to have to go and pry them out of a job they probably are enjoying. That's hard. And so what I would suggest to the person who asked this question was that there are a lot of things you can do to increase your chances of making it through the automated resume screening and having the conversation. Obviously, one of those things is building your skills. Pragmatic training is one way to do that. You can also volunteer at things that would help you build those product management skills. That could be open source projects. That could be internal projects that maybe don't have a product manager assigned to them, that maybe you could take on some of that work. I would also encourage you to network the hell out of everything you do. If you're in a city that offers it, I would encourage you to check out Product Camp. They're all over the world now, and they are a free networking event for product people. And they are by and for sort of the creme de la creme of product people in that place. I started one in Austin, Texas about 12, 13 years ago. And it's gone on to be hugely successful. And it's one of the largest networking events of its type in the world. And I can point to dozens of people who have found jobs or hired people through Product Camp. So I highly recommend that. If you go to productcamp.org, you can see the full list of where they're happening. Pragmatic sponsors those. And I would also recommend our PAC, Pragmatic alumni community as well. If you've gone through one of our trainings, you get free access to the PAC. But we have thousands of alumni on there, and they're always looking for help. And they want to hire people who already speak the language and they know the lingo, and they're doing the things that we teach about being market driven and outside in and so on. You already know that stuff because you've hopefully gone through some learning with us. So why not go hook up with somebody who's already walking down that path that you want to go down? So check out the PAC. That's a great place to continue the networking and find the next thing. Your job is not going to come through a job posting. It's going to come through a network. So increase your network, amp that up, and always have open eyes and open ears. That's the best advice I can give.
And while we're talking about the PAC that I so lovingly adore, I do have one more question that actually I feel like ties in as well, right? Like, Felice asks, how do I get a contract with dealers or distributors who are more streamlined? Are there places or trusted sources that you suggest turning to make connections both internally and externally? Who to best utilize? So, I know that we have a ton of that there, right? And, so just kind of everything that the PAC offers, right? I mean, you can start a thread, right? You can ask these questions. I mean, everyone's super willing to engage and help any way possible.
Yeah. So for Felice's question, how do I get in contact with dealers and distributors? Are there places you could turn to make those connections? This is one of those where I feel like I would need a lot more information to give a really good answer here about the specifics of her situation and what's going on. But here's what I would think about. So industry events, conferences, trade shows, things like that are good places to find distributors and dealers. Basically channel partners, that's a good place to go. Your sales team is another great place to go because they probably know people that they've worked with in the past. They know the network of dealers and distributors who are more streamlined. I would suggest there. Your executive team is another good place to go. LinkedIn, right? Go browse around LinkedIn and find others. Your competition. We talked about competitive analysis earlier. Why not go to the competition and see who they're using as their distributors? You might be able to go and have a conversation with them. Are they happy with the competitor's product? Maybe not. Maybe they're ready to switch it out for your product, or at least bring on both lines. So lots of different ideas here about starting points, but Felice, if you want to come on a future AMA and expand on your question a little bit, we're happy to get into it.
That's great. Well, Paul, thank you so much. We've hit our time, but now is the most exciting part of our journey where we decide the best live question for today. So obviously we had Lanka, who was, interested in sort of the differentiating those user stories versus market requirements. We had Alika, who, was interested in following up on that feature question about sort of value. I mean, in your own opinion, what did you find the most fun to answer, the most thought-provoking? The choice is yours.
I can't go wrong here. All good questions. And I feel like I'm being put in a hard situation because I'm having to pick from only 2 people. But this is rough. So Lanka, I'm going to go with you today. Your question about user stories versus, requirements and so on. I think that's a good one. And enjoy your lunch on us.
Lanka, enjoy your lunch on us. Shoot me your email in the chat before we leave, and we'll make sure we get you over that Grubhub so you can get lunch on us to your favorite restaurant.
Hey, I won last time too. I haven't seen anything yet.
Oh no?
No, I won it last from Sarah.
I
Right?
sent it last Friday. Why don't you connect with me because it might be in a spam folder.
Oh, okay. I will do that.
Yeah.
Okay. Some reason I am having trouble with my computer. It is trying to update and all this nonsense, and I'm getting in and out of there. Now my keyboard is not working. It's lanka.vandort, one word.
Well, if you won already, I should have it.
All right. Okay.
Let me check. You hang on, and we'll figure that out.
Okay.
And in the meantime, we love Eric. We love having you. Thank you. Eric says, these sessions are so helpful in making me better at my job. You're pros. We greatly appreciate you. We appreciate you. Certainly love these intimate sessions where we kind of get to the nitty gritty and really kind of dig in. So thank you for that. And, we have tons of offerings, right? Our product chats are another great resource where you can kind of get that immediate takeaway and sort of that food for thought that you can implement right away. So, our next one is February 23rd at 2:30 p.m. Eastern. This is where we'll be welcoming Fasima Mohammed. She's doing her discussion on how I built this discussion, a strong relationship between product and community. So, really going to dig into understanding what good collaboration looks like, easy wins that drive user satisfaction, and how community does really promote happy users. So you can find all those details on our website or on our social channels. But in the meantime, we certainly appreciate you. Paul, we appreciate you. Thanks for being with us today. I hope you're staying warm over there. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Good to see everybody. Have a great weekend. Happy Friday.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.